Hey cool kids, this week I have a story for you. Now this story is a little shorter than my last Storytime video, but seeing as it's spooky month, I figured it'd be a good time to tell it. Our story begins in 2014. I'd just graduated high school, but because of issues with my immigration, I couldn't actually apply for colleges or get a job, so I was basically stuck in this weird limbo for like a year where I knew I should be doing adulting things, but I just couldn't. Luckily, my dad's bosses at the time, for the sake of the story we'll call them Katie and Mike, were willing to give me odd jobs here and there to tide me over and provide me with funds for my overwhelming sunflower seed addiction. Now, Katie and Mike were married, and they had 2 children, a daughter who we'll call B, who was about 5 or 6, and a son we'll call the baby because he was a baby. Obviously, for a couple young working parents of 2, it's hard to find time for yourself. But on that particular Friday night, they'd gotten 2 tickets to an African drum concert, and they'd be damned if they were going to pass up on that opportunity. So they go to call up their regular babysitter, and she was busy because, it was a Friday night, and I guess she had friends or whatever. So Katie and Mike were like, dang, who do we know who has no social life and is willing to watch our child? And they're like, oh yeah, what about that Melody girl? She's really good at handing out pamphlets, and she has approximately 1 million siblings, so she's probably qualified to watch our child. And so they go up to my dad, and he's like, yeah, no, Melody literally never has anything going on anytime ever, and he landed me the gig. I'd been to Katie and Mike's house a couple of times before for company barbecues, so I knew the basic layout of the place, but Katie still gave me the whole grand tour, showing me where the TV was, and she told me that anything in the fridge was up for grabs as long as I washed my dishes after, and so on and so forth. We got to the end of the tour, and I was like, oh, okay, well then, where's B? When do you want me to put her down? And Katie was like, oh, don't worry about it. She's sleeping over at a friend's house. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, when do you want me to put the baby down? And Katie goes, oh, no, don't worry about it. Mike's putting him down right now, and he usually sleeps throughout the night. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she asked me if I had any other questions, and I had been sniffling the whole tour. So I'm like, yeah, do you have a cat? And she's like, oh yeah, we do. His name is Tut. Are you allergic? And I'm like, yeah, a little bit. And so she goes, oh no, don't even worry. He's super shy, so he probably won't even bother you. But if he does, or if you have any issues at all, just call us and we'll come right home. And I didn't want to keep them any longer because I didn't want them to miss their African drum concert. So I let them go. It took me about 20 minutes to figure out how to turn the TV on because it was one of those fancy pants smart TVs where all the buttons are hidden in weird places to make the design sleek or whatever. But eventually I got it going, got a movie up on Netflix, and I settled in. I started to text my friend Rose because she was the only person I knew with real babysitting experience, and also because no one else would answer my messages. And I asked her for tips. She told me that watching one kid who was a sleeping baby was the easiest gig she'd ever heard of, and that as long as I made sure the baby didn't die, I'd probably be fine. Now, something you should know about me is that I am naturally a very anxious person. The idea of watching other people's children is honestly terrifying to me, and on top of that, I was really into horror stories during that period of my life, and I'd read my fair shares of stories about terrible babysitters who just let the baby die, and I was like, oh my god, Rose, you're right, I need to be constantly checking on the baby to make sure he's still alive, and she was like, no, Melody, you really don't, but okay. So I started checking on the baby regularly, making sure he was breathing and all that fun stuff. Because I had been giving Rose updates the entire time, I ended up using up all the battery in the tablet I'd brought, and I forgot the charger, so I eventually had to say goodnight to her and just settle into the movie. By this point, it started to rain. Now, I live up north, so rain's pretty common, and in fact, it's almost weirder when it doesn't rain in my town, but it was loud rain, and the wind was even louder, and I wasn't a big fan, but what was I gonna do? Tell the sky to stop raining? So I tried to focus on watching the movie and checking on the baby and not freaking out too much. But then the lights started to flicker. And again, this isn't actually something that's terribly uncommon in my town. Our electrical grid is held together by decades-old duct tape and good vibes, so shoddy power is bound to happen, but it still wasn't something that I wanted to happen when I was alone in someone else's house in the middle of the night watching their baby. At one point the power went completely out, and it was only for like less than a minute, but that was enough time to shut off the TV, and I was like, dang it, I spent nearly a half an hour getting that thing on. I don't want to worry about it again. So I figured I'd take up Katie's offer to raid the fridge. I settled for some ice cream because that's the ideal comfort food. While I was eating it, I started to hear some noises around the house. I tried to discount them to the wind, but they did remind me that it'd been like a good 10 minutes since I'd last checked on the baby, so I set aside my ice cream and went to check on him. As with the past 20 or so times, he was still fine, still fast asleep. I went back into the kitchen and I noticed something was off. I had definitely left my spoon in my ice cream bowl when I went to check on the baby because it was dirty, and I'm not the type of filthy animal to just leave my dirty spoon like laying on the table. But when I got back to the kitchen, there was my spoon just sitting on the kitchen table right next to my bowl. And I was a little shaken by this point, and I'd lost my appetite, so I just decided to clean out my bowl in the sink, and as soon as I was done, I went back to check on the baby. By this point, he was still fine, still sleeping. I decided to go back to trying to work out the TV again to calm my nerves, and that's when the scratching started. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from the TV, like maybe I'd somehow turned it on to some weird channel, but I hadn't even managed to get it on yet. I tried to find other places the noises could be coming from, like maybe a tree outside or a toy in B's room, but no. It was coming from the baby's room. I briefly debated what I should do. I thought about maybe calling Katie and Mike, but honestly, if I had to choose between facing some mysterious, terrifying hellbeast on my own or having a brief conversation over the phone, I would choose the hellbeast. So I armed myself with the heaviest thing I could find, a paprika shaker, and headed to the baby's room. I could clearly hear that the scratching was definitely coming from behind the door, so I braced myself and I turned the knob. And out of the room darted the biggest, fattest, angriest cat I had ever seen. So anyway, it turns out that in my last time checking the baby's room, I'd accidentally locked in Katie and Mike's cat Tut. He ended up being a lot friendlier after I freed him, and he actually kept me company for the rest of the time until Katie and Mike came home. I decided not to tell them about how I'd locked their angry cat in with their tiny baby, and they ended up paying me $50 and driving me home. I actually babysat for them a couple more times, and allergies aside, Tut was nice company. Eventually I got my immigration and could get a real job, so I didn't sit for them anymore, but that was also fine because like they got a divorce and they didn't need me, and ultimately I think the fragility of marriage is the true horror behind the story, but I guess that doesn't make for a very spooky title. But that's all the time I have for this story. Have a wonderful Halloween and hope to see you next time. Bye!